Also going to talk about this instrument and tell you how it works. And I'm then going to present a series of 4 or 5 experiments which we've done with the simulated classroom. And then in these studies we focused on teacher judgment accuracy concerning minority students' academic achievement. And I'm then going to come to some conclusions from my research on teacher judgment accuracy. And finally, I'm going to say a little bit about a network on teachers' assessment competencies that we have just recently established in Germany. And I know that some people from this network are here, and maybe we can have an even bigger network, European network on this issue. Maybe the EARLI this year could be the start of it. Okay. Let me talk about the impact that teachers' perceptions of students can have in learning context. The first important point is that teachers' judgments of students' academic achievement can influence students' educational trajectories. This is especially true when it comes to summative assessment, and in Germany it is the case that teachers' judgments are often used for summative assessment. So the count of teachers' judgments is quite heavy. I know that there are other countries, for example the United States, which mostly rely on standardized achievement testing in summative assessment. But in many other countries it's still the case that teachers' judgments have a heavy weight when it comes to decisions on educational trajectories of students. Teachers' judgments can also have an influence on the identification of students with special educational needs. So when it comes to the identification of those students, teachers' judgments are often used to identify them. And I guess this is the case in many of the countries I read about so far, also in the United States. Then there's evidence that teachers' judgments of students have an impact on significant life outcomes. In a recent study by Fischbach et al., the authors found that teachers' judgments of students' cognitive abilities at the age of 12 predicted significant life outcomes at the age of 52, like educational success, health, and socioeconomic status. So I think this was a quite neat study that showed that teachers' judgments also have long-term impact. And then my last point is that teachers' judgments also have an impact on instructional decisions. This is an idea that is deeply based in the literature on formative assessment. Here the idea is that teachers use their judgment they make in the course of instructions for further instructional decisions. And I think this research is also very important, it underlines that teachers' judgments are really important. And I think in all of these areas, the question whether teachers' judgments are accurate or not and how far they are accurate is a very important question, and that is what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to focus on this issue of teacher judgment accuracy. Teacher judgment accuracy has been studied quite extensively over the past years in the respective studies. The relationship between teachers' judgments and students' performance on a standardized achievement test is usually examined. And what studies also do is that they examine factors that influence the relationship between teachers' judgments and students' test performance, which would be moderators in methodological terms. So to systemize the moderators of teacher judgment accuracy, we have developed a model of the issue. This is already part of the model. Teacher judgment accuracy is at its core. The teacher judgment accuracy is, as I said, the correspondence between teachers' judgments and students' test performance. And usually the correlation between these two measures is used as a measure of teacher judgment accuracy. However, there are also other indicators of teacher judgment accuracy that can be used, like the mean difference between teachers' judgments and students' test performance. In our model assumes that a student's test performance may be influenced by student characteristics on the one side, and that it may also be influenced by test characteristics. And when we look at the teacher's judgment, we assume that it may be influenced by teacher characteristics and also by judgment characteristics. And what the model also assumes that the correspondence between these characteristics is important. So we assume that the correspondence between judgment characteristics and test characteristics has an influence on teacher judgment accuracy, and we also assume that the correspondence between teacher characteristics and student characteristics has an influence on teacher judgment accuracy. Let me give you some examples of these characteristics so you get a better idea of what I mean with these things. Let's look at the teacher characteristics first. In the literature, it is quite often assumed that teachers' professional experience has an influence on teachers' judgment accuracy. We quite often find the assumption that teachers with more professional experience, like more years of teaching or higher levels of education, are better judges of their students' academic achievement. From all of the studies I know so far, there's only little evidence for this assumption so far. So it might be kind of counterintuitive, but we don't find very many studies where we can show an influence of these professional experiences on teacher judgment accuracy. Let's then look at the student characteristics. One student's characteristics that I picked here is student's ethnicity, and our model assumes that certain student characteristics influence teachers' perceptions of students, and that these characteristics can also have an influence on teacher judgment accuracy. And I'm going to talk about this specific issue later on when I talk about the experiments we did with the simulated classroom. As I said, we also assume that the correspondence between teacher characteristics and student characteristics is important, and the characteristic I picked here is ethnicity. So we think that it might make a difference when a teacher is of a certain ethnicity and the student is of a different one, or whether they are both of the same ethnicity, and that this might make a difference in teachers' perceptions and in these teacher-student interaction. Now let's look at the judgment characteristics. In studies on teacher judgment accuracies, the teachers are asked to make a judgment of students' academic performance. And those judgments in the terms of our meta-analysis may be informed or uninformed. So in some studies, the teachers are asked to make a judgment of students' academic achievement without knowing the test their judgment will be compared to. So they will be asked, please rate students' reading ability on a scale from 1 to 6, but they will not know that the students will take a certain test of reading ability and that their judgment will be compared to this test. And there are other studies which will inform teachers about the test, so they get the test, can look at it, and then they are asked to make the judgment. So this would we consider to be an informed judgment. And that is one judgment characteristics that we think is important in this context. Now the test characteristics. Here one important thing is the subject area the test is about. In the literature, authors quite often assume that there are differences in teachers' judgment accuracy between different subjects, that it might be easier to judge academic performance in mathematics as compared to performance on in reading comprehension, for example. So, but from the studies I know so far, you don't often find these differences. And as I said, we also assume that the congruence between judgment and test characteristics has an influence on teacher judgment accuracy, and I'm going to talk about in a little more detail about the congruence in domain specificity, because it was an important moderator in our meta-analysis. And with this congruence in domain specificity, we mean, let's start with the judgment characteristics. In some studies, teachers are asked to judge students' academic achievement very generally, so we would consider this to be an unspecific judgment, while in other studies they will be asked to judge students' reading ability, which is a little more specific, or students' decoding speed, which is even more specific. So, and this can also be the case concerning the test characteristics. So in the studies, they may use a test of general academic ability, or of reading ability, or of decoding speed. And our assumption was that when the congruence in domain specificity is high, that teachers will achieve higher teacher judgment accuracy then. So if teachers are asked to judge students' reading ability, and when this judgment is compared to a test of reading ability, we would say congruence in domain specificity is high. Versus when teachers are asked to judge students' academic achievement and their judgment is compared to a test of decoding speed, then we would say the congruence in domain specificity is low. Okay, this was our model of teacher judgment accuracy and some examples for each of the characteristics. And I'm now going to talk about the key results of our meta-analysis. It was actually based on a prior meta-analysis dating from 1989. And in our meta-analysis, we summarize studies reporting correlational data on the relationship between teachers' judgments of students' academic achievement and students' performance on a standardized test. We did a systematic review of the literature dating from 1989 to 2009, and in the course of the literature research and prior to it, we applied several inclusion and exclusion criteria, which I'm not going to talk about too deeply now, but we did apply them. I wanted to let you know. And in the end, we identified 75 relevant studies which were included in the final analysis. And what we did was that we analyzed teacher judgment accuracy. So we were interested in the mean correspondence between teacher judgments and students' academic performance. And we also analyzed different moderators of teacher judgment accuracy, which we systemized in the model I just talked about. The key results of the meta-analysis were that the teachers' judgments are fairly accurate. The overall mean effect size was 0.63, and we interpret in a way that teachers' judgments are fairly accurate, but that there's room for improvement. So what we also find is that there are large inter-individual differences between teacher judgment accuracy, which makes you concerned for some of the teachers in those studies. Then we identified two moderators of teacher judgment accuracy. The one was uninformed versus informed teacher judgments. So teachers who were informed about the content of the test, their judgment was compared to later achieved higher teacher judgment accuracy. And the congruence in domain specificity I just talked about in more detail was also a significant moderator. So when the congruence in domain specificity was high, teacher judgment accuracy was higher. I think we studied about 16 or 17 moderators in the meta-analysis, and none of the other moderators became significant. So there was no effect of the subject matter. It didn't make a difference whether teachers were asked to make norm-referenced versus peer-independent judgments. And surprisingly, it also didn't make a difference whether the time gap between the teacher making the judgment and the students taking the academic achievement test was big or whether it was small. So none of these moderators we studied were significant. What I also have to say is that in the meta-analysis we were not able to analyze teacher or student characteristics as moderators. We planned to do this in the beginning, but there was too little information on teacher and student characteristics. So if you ever do a study on teacher judgment accuracy, I urge you to provide a good description of the teacher and the student sample. Maybe also one that is comparable to other studies, so that we will be able to study these factors in future meta-analyses. There actually is another meta-analysis in the pipeline by the Möller group. Niels Macht just did a meta-analysis on the accuracy of teachers' judgments of students' cognitive abilities, and I hope for him and for my colleagues that it will come out soon. Okay, this was the part about field studies on teacher judgment accuracy, and I'm now going to go over to a quite different approach, to an approach that is more grounded in psychology, I guess. I'm going to talk about some experimental studies we did on teacher judgment accuracy And at first I would like to make the point that there are different experimental approaches to the study of teacher judgment accuracy. This is an example of the so-called mouse lab method, which was developed by the Krolak-Schwert and Kresel research group. In this mouse lab, the participants can find different information. I apologize that it is in German, but it is a computer program, and people can look at different information about students, like their last grades, or their achievement on a test, or their cognitive abilities, or their anxiety in class, and things like that. So, after looking at these information, the teachers or the participants have to make a decision on students' educational trajectories. A quite similar program or experimental approach is the so-called student inventory that has also been developed by the Möller group in Kiel. It is a computer program that includes different information about students, like students' general cognitive abilities. You can find information on students' self-concept, and also on grades, on tests. And in this scenario, the participants can look at this information, and they have to make a judgment on students' future academic achievement, and they are also asked to predict students' later or the best educational academic track for the student. Actually, Johanna Kaiser is going to talk about this study with the student inventory on Saturday. So if you're interested, please come. Then I brought a slightly different approach. Anna Pretorius did a study using video sequences that were presented to the teachers, and the teachers looked at the video sequences and were asked to judge students' academic self-concept. And in her study she used the zero acquaintance approach and found that teachers' judgments of these small video sequences were actually quite accurate. They were about as accurate as judgments that teachers made on students in their real classroom. So this was also quite interesting study, I think, and it's also a good idea to use videos in these experimental approaches. And there are, I guess, many different other experimental approaches to the study of teacher judgments. But I'm now going to talk about in more detail about the program that we used in our studies. We named it the simulated classroom, and it is based on a computer simulation that was developed by Klaus Fiedler, a social psychologist, and we adapted it to the needs of educational research. The simulated classroom is a computer simulation of a classroom situation, and in this program the teacher takes over the role of, the user takes over the role of a teacher, and he or she interacts with simulated students. He can address questions to the students and is then asked to observe their responses. And the students show experimentally manipulated levels of ability and engagement. And after they've done this for a while, teachers are asked to judge students' achievement and engagement. The simulated classroom is programmed in Java, and the participants work individually on personal computers. And when they begin, we give them an instruction about the functioning of the simulated classroom, and they are also told something about the grade the students are in and about the content of the lesson, which is mathematics in this case, and these are third graders. The task for the participants is to select questions from the menu on the left side and direct them to the students. The students are represented, I don't know if you can see it, by the desk and the names. And they are also represented by the pictures. I think you can see them quite well. The names are right below the pictures. The pictures, the names, the seating position in the classrooms are randomized. So there's a different class for each participant in one experiment, which has the advantage that the different characteristics of the students are not confounded and don't have an influence on teachers' judgments in the experiment. Each question that is selected by the teacher is displayed on the bottom, here on the right side of the computer screen, and then some students volunteer to answer the question. These students are indicated by the yellow coloring of the desk. The teachers in this scenario may call on any student. They can ask the students who volunteer to answer, but they can also direct the questions to the other ones. The students, when you click at the students, they answer the question, and the question then appears at the bottom right of the computer screen. If the answer is correct, it appears in a green box, and if the answer is incorrect, it appears in a red box. So when one of these question-answer sequences has been completed, the teacher can choose another question and direct it to any students he or she wants to. And the lesson of the length of the lesson can be varied, and during the time of the lesson, the teachers can ask as many questions as they want. The students give correct or incorrect answers, as I said, and this is the measure of students' ability. In this program, we can manipulate the proportion of correct answers given by each student, and that is our measure of students' academic ability in this context. At the end of the lesson, teachers are asked to judge the proportion of correct answers given by each student. So that is the achievement judgment I'm going to talk about later. And with this judgment, it is possible to compare it directly to the student's academic achievement level. This is the program that we used, or it is pretty much the program that we used in the experiments I'm going to present now. We are still in the course of developing the program further, and there are some new features of the program which are quite nice and which I'm just going to mention. One of these features is that we now have feedback for the participants. This is quite nice for them, I think, and at least they tell us that it's nice. They get feedback on their accuracy of judgments. They know later on whether they were correct or incorrect at judging students' performance. We have also been working on implementing different information about students. You can implement information on students' background, for example, on their parents' level of education, or on students' general cognitive abilities, or students' preferred subjects, or their preferred activities in free time. And this also may have an influence on teacher judgment accuracy, and I think it's quite neat that you can implement all this different information, and in whatever research question you are interested in, I think the simulated classroom has many possibilities there. However, any one of you who has conducted experiments before knows that it's not a good idea to manipulate too many different things at the same time. We sometimes have to stop ourselves from thinking, yes, we can do this and this and this, and then the whole experiment is screwed up. So it's better to stick with one thing first. We have also been working on implementing tasks of varying difficulty. Right now we tell the participants that the tasks they can choose in the simulated classroom are all of the same difficulty, which is pretty much true because we used tasks from standardized achievement tests, for which we have the empirical item difficulties, but we all know that this is not very realistic in real-life classrooms. We have tasks of varying difficulties. It is important to have tasks of varying difficulty, and yeah, it would be nice if we could also have them in the simulated classroom, and yeah, I think we're getting there. We're coming up with ideas how we can then, if we have varying difficulties in tasks, how we then can compare the teachers' judgments to the students' academic achievement. And in Kiel, my colleagues are also working on developing an online version of the tool, so there can be more people can be tested with this instrument, and yeah, we can go on with internet studies then. Okay, I hope this introduction to the simulated classroom has been clear enough, because I'm now going to go over to the experiments we ran with the simulated classroom. As I said in the introduction, I'm going to focus on this part of the model now, on the influence of student characteristics on teacher judgment accuracy. And the student characteristics that we studied in the experiments were students' ethnicity, student gender, and students' disability status. Actually, at least 4 of these experiments are described in a paper Johanna Kaiser has recently written, so she's the first author of these studies. I'm going to talk about a little bit about the theoretical background. We have evidence that that students' ethnicity can have an influence on teachers' judgments. In a study by Reddy and Wright, teachers underestimated the literacy skills of Asian, Hispanic, and African American children compared to European American children. So this was in American studies, and they found that students' ethnicity made a difference. However, there are other studies that do not find a difference in teachers' judgment concerning students of different ethnicity. For example, the studies by Hachfeld et al. Or Madden et al. So we were, in our experimental studies, interested in these issues and wanted to find out whether a difference in teachers' judgments can be found in an experimental condition. What we can also learn from the study by Reddy and Wright is that the context of teachers' judgments is important. So they showed in their study that it is relevant to teacher judgment accuracy whether the students form the minority versus the majority in the classroom. They found a stronger association between students' socioeconomic status and teachers' judgments in low SES classrooms compared to high SES classrooms. And this is an idea that we also implemented in our studies with the simulated classroom. We looked we took care of who comprised the minority versus the majority in the classroom. So this is a very short theoretical introduction, I know, but I found the results of the experiments to be more interesting for presentation. The research questions. The first one is, do teachers judge the achievement of ethnicity of ethnic minority students according to a predominant expectation or stereotype? That was the first research question, and that was actually the one we started with in our series of experiments. And then, second, we also wanted to know if teachers' judgment accuracy is moderated by students' ethnicity or by students' minority status. And we also came up with this based on results in our studies with the simulated classroom. When I talked about the results later, I would like to make the note that the first research question refers, or predominantly refers to the teacher's judgments themselves. So the teacher judgment is the dependent variable. The second research question focused on teacher judgment accuracy, so it focuses on the correspondence between the student's actual achievement and the teacher's judgments. So this was the design of our first studies. We have two independent variables in this design, achievement and ethnicity. And we implemented 3 levels of student achievement: low, medium and high achievement. For the low achieving students, the probability of giving a correct answer is 20%. So the students with a low ability gave a correct answer to 20% of the questions they were asked. For the high achieving students, we have a probability of giving a correct answer of 80%. So students with a high ability gave a correct answer to 80% of the questions they were asked. And this is how the students' achievement in the simulated classroom is operationalized. Then we implemented students of 3 different ethnicities. We did the study with German teachers and German teacher students, and we chose Turkish students to be implemented, German ones, and Asian students. And the different ethnicities are basically operationalized by pictures, typical pictures, and names of the students. I would like to say that, which you might have already seen, that the Turkish students in this simulated classroom are in the minority. So there are only 3 Turkish students in this classroom, and the German students comprise the majority. So we have 8 German students and 1 Asian student in the classroom. Our sample in this study comprised 34 elementary school teachers with a mean age of 45 years. And now I would like to have you look at the descriptive results first. They are categorized by student ethnicity and also by students' achievement levels. And we may want to look at the low achieving students first. The low achieving students of the Turkish minority in the classroom were judged lower than the students of the low achieving students of the German majority in the classroom. And when we look at the high achieving students, we can see that the high achieving Turkish minority students were judged higher than the high achieving German majority students. So these are the descriptive results for the experiment. I forgot to mention that the N, the sample size, indicates the number of available judgments for the students. So we had 34 teachers in the sample who judged 3 low achieving German students, so that makes 102 judgments. And as I said, we were also interested in whether there was an influence of students' ethnicity or of students' minority status on teacher judgment accuracy, and this is illustrated by this picture. So we did a moderation analysis in this context. And these are the results of the moderation analysis. As expected, we found a high positive relationship between students' actual achievement and teachers' judgment. Teachers' judgments in the simulated classroom were again quite accurate. The minority status of students, which is the students' ethnicity here, did not have a significant effect on teachers' judgments. So the teachers did not make a difference in their judgments between students of the different ethnicities. But the interaction between students' actual achievement and minority status was a significant predictor of teacher judgments, which means that the Turkish students of the ethnic minority in the classroom were judged more accurately than the German students of the ethnic majority in the classroom. So we had better judgment accuracy for the minority students. We then did another study which has pretty much the same design as the study before. We again had 3 levels of student achievement and 3 levels of students' ethnicity. We had again 12 students in the classroom, and this time 3 Asian students comprised the minority in the classroom, and 8 German students comprised the majority in the classroom. The sample were 30 elementary school teachers, and their mean age was 41 years. And these are the descriptive results again. They are presented the same way as before. They're categorized by students' ethnicity and students' academic achievement again, and you can see the manipulated student achievement level, the actual achievement, and the achievement judgment. And I would like you to look at the teachers' judgments of the high achieving students first. In this study, the high achieving Asian minority students were judged higher than the high achieving German majority students. And when we look at the low achieving students, we can see that the Asian minority students were judged lower than the German majority students. And with these data, we also ran a moderation analysis, and again, we found a high positive relationship between the students' actual achievement and the teachers' judgments. We found no significant effect of the students' minority status, or here the ethnicity status, on teachers' judgments. But again, we did find that students' minority status is a significant moderator of teacher judgment accuracy. The Asian students of the ethnic minority in the class were judged more accurately than the German students of the ethnic majority in the classroom. So we found these results to be quite interesting, and we came up that this might have something to do with that the Turkish student and the Asian students were always in the minority, and we thought about reversing the design and let the German students be the minority in the classroom. And that's what we did in the third study. In this design, we again manipulated students' academic achievement and students' ethnicity. And there's a difference. We only had 10 students in this simulated classroom. And as you can see, the German students, there are 2 German students who comprised the minority in this simulated classroom. And there are 8 Turkish students who comprised the majority in the classroom. We did this study with the teacher students. There were 48 university students from the University of Kiel, and their mean age was 24 years. And these are the descriptive results again. As before, I think it's most interesting to look at the high achieving and the low achieving students. The low achieving German minority students were judged lower than the low achieving Turkish majority students. And when we look at the high achieving students in the classroom, the German minority students were judged higher than the Turkish majority students in this simulated classroom. And with these data, we also ran the moderation analysis. And again, we found a high positive relationship between students' actual achievement and teachers' judgments. The coefficient is even higher than in the studies before, and I think this is because we only had 10 students this time, and before we always had 12. So there are less students that need to be judged. Again, we found no effect of students' minority status on teacher judgments, but again, the interaction was a significant predictor. The German students of the ethnic minority in the class were judged more accurate than the Turkish students of the ethnic majority in the classroom. Okay, we found quite impressive that we could find the same results across these different experiments and across different samples and some adaptations to the classroom scenario. And we then decided to do another study with a different student characteristic, and that was gender. So in the fourth experiment, we implemented boys and girls and looked at whether it made a difference in teacher judgment accuracy whether boys or girls were the minority or majority in the classroom. In this study, we had 4 levels of academic achievement. So students had a probability of giving a correct answer of 0.20, 0.40, 0.60, and 0.80. And as I said, we manipulated gender, so there were female and male students in the classroom. In this design, the female students are in the majority, and the male students comprise the minority in the classroom. In this study, we used a split sample design, so one half of the participants saw a simulated classroom like this, and for the other half of the sample it was the other way around. So the second half of the sample had 12 male students in their classroom and 4 female students. The sample were 52 university students enrolled in a teacher education program, and their mean age was 24 years ago. We analyzed the data together for both of the student-teacher sample and just differentiated between majority and minority students, and this is pretty much the table you already know from the other experiments, except we have 4 different levels of student achievement now. And on this table we can also look at the high achieving students first, and here we also find that students of the minority in the classroom, if they were either boys or girls, were judged higher than the high achieving majority students. And we can also find the results for the low achieving students, that the minority students in the classroom were judged, the low achieving minority students were judged lower than the low achieving majority students in the classroom. And with these data we also ran a moderation analysis and again found a high positive relationship between the students' actual achievement and the teacher's judgments. The coefficient is a little bit lower this time, which is probably due to the fact that we had more students in the classroom. Now, again, there was no, the minority status was not a significant predictor of teachers' judgments. But again, the students of the minority in the class were judged more accurately than the students of the majority in the classroom. So we found the result that there is higher teacher judgment accuracy for minority students across these 4 experiments. To summarize this up, I think I've made or highlighted that we did not find a bias in teachers' judgments of ethnic minority students. So, as one might expect, that there are differences in teachers' judgments of students, we did not find this effect. So teachers' expectations to ethnicity, related to ethnicity, did not play a role for the teachers in our samples, which we think is quite promising. What we also found is that the ethnic minority students were judged more accurately than the ethnic majority students, and this is what we found in the experiments 1, 2, 3. And with conducting the 4th experiment, we also found that students performing a minority in the classroom in general, so we had 2 different student characteristics, ethnicity and gender. These students, being the minority in the classroom, were generally judged more accurately. And one possible explanation for this effect is that the minority in the classroom is more salient to the teachers, so that they pay more attention to these students when doing the question-answer sequences, and they also might remember them better later on when judging the students' academic achievement. We then did a 5th experiment, which we did just recently and which is embedded in the context I'm working in at TU Dortmund University now. I'm at the Faculty of Rehabilitation Sciences, and I'm involved in teacher education, in education of teachers teaching students with special educational needs. And so we did a quite similar study as the ones before, but this time we implemented students with special educational needs to the classroom. This is already the design of the study, and I think you're quite familiar with this now. We manipulated students' academic achievement on 4 levels. Students had a probability of answering correctly of 0.10, 0.30, 0.50 and 0.70. And there were students for whom teachers had the information that they were students with special educational needs in learning, and there were students not having a special educational needs in learning. In this design, the students with special educational needs were in the minorities. So there were 4 students with special educational needs and 8 students without special educational needs. And what I think is a pity is that the results are a little different now. Again, we found a high positive relationship between students' actual achievement and teachers' judgment. So teacher judgment accuracy was quite high again. We also, and we didn't find this before, the students' minority status had an influence on teachers' judgments. So students with special educational needs were judged lower than the students without special educational needs. We also found that the interaction is significant. So students of the minority in the class were still judged more accurately than students of the majority in the classroom. And this is mostly the case because the students with special educational needs were judged lower and in that way more accurately than the other students. But the high achieving students with special educational needs, they were not judged higher than the students of special educational needs, but about the same. So in this experiment we did find an effect of students' minority status or of the student characteristic which is disability status this time. now I guess this is my final discussion. In the series of experiments I just presented, we found that teacher judgment accuracy is moderated by students' minority or majority status. In my understanding, I think it's another demonstration that there are biases in human information processing and also biases in teachers' judgments, and that there are certain principles underlying human information processes. And I think it's important to make teachers students, but also to make teachers aware of these biases and that they may occur to any one of us. Then another finding is that teacher judgments were not biased by ethnic or gender stereotypes. I think this is a wonderful finding, that teachers were not, did not make judgments based on their expectations towards students of different ethnicities. However, we did find that teachers' judgments were biased towards students with special educational needs. They judged them lower than the students without special educational needs. And I think one possible explanation for this is that the students' disability status is more closely related to expectations for students' academic achievement, in contrast to other characteristics like ethnicity or gender. I'm now going to discuss the method a little bit. As I said, I'm quite convinced of the simulated classroom. I don't know how about you yet, and I would be happy to discuss the studies with you later on. I think it is very nice that the simulated classroom allows for controlling different student and judgment characteristics. From our meta-analysis, we can refer that it is important to control the judgment characteristics, and I think we were successful in doing this in our studies. The experimental approach also has the advantage that we are able to disentangle student characteristics that are usually confounded in real-life classrooms. So we could disentangle student characteristics like students' ethnicity, gender, and their majority versus minority status. As I think in any experiment, we have high internal validity at the expense of ecological validity, and we have to ask ourselves the question whether the same findings can be expected in real-life classrooms. As I said, we have been working with this experimental approach for quite a while, and we think that we have at least some evidence for this. One is that the participants using the simulated classroom report that they are really engaged in the simulated classroom situation, and especially teachers, students find it quite interesting to participate in a study and to have the opportunity to judge the simulated students. We also think that it demonstrates that the psychological processes are similar in the field and in the simulated classroom, because we find the same pattern of results across different samples and across different methodological adaptations to our simulated classroom. And we also, Johanna Kaiser did a study, she published in 2013, in which we had, I think, 3 experimental studies or two, and one field study, and we could show that the results in the field studies and the experimental studies were quite similar. But we also know that we need to continue to work on this aspect. We've often thought about running studies in which we can directly compare teachers' judgments in real classrooms to their achievement in the simulated classroom. Now my general conclusions. I think I have demonstrated so far that teachers' judgments are fairly accurate, and I think this is a good finding. I think I've also highlighted that teachers' judgments are of importance in learning context, and I think that teachers are a powerful source of information on student learning, and that we should strengthen teachers' assessment competencies in a way, and to help them to be better judges of students' academic achievement. And I think from our studies we can also refer that it is important to consider the context in which teachers make judgments, so that you have to think about majorities and minorities in the classroom, for example. Okay, as I said, I'm also going to introduce our network of research on teachers' assessment competencies at the end of my talk. As you might know, in many studies on teachers' diagnostic competence, as we say in European countries, I wrote teachers' assessment competencies now. Teachers' assessment competencies or teachers' diagnostic competency is defined as teacher judgment accuracy. And I think this thinking is quite short, so I think that there's more to teachers' assessment competencies than just being able to make a judgment of students' academic achievement and to reach high teacher judgment accuracy. So with colleagues from all over Germany, we have recently established a network on teachers' assessment competencies which aims to go beyond the study of teacher judgment accuracy, and our aims are first to establish a theoretical framework for research on teacher judgment accuracy, and we are also aiming at developing methods for the assessment of teachers' assessment competencies that go beyond teacher judgment accuracy. We will also have a session on the issue of good methods for the analysis of teacher judgment accuracy or teachers' assessment competencies. This is more the research part. And then we are going to go over to the practical part again, and we are aiming at developing methods to foster teachers' assessment competencies in a broader context. And these are the people of the network. I know many of them are here, and I feel very honored to work with these wonderful people. It has been a lot of fun so far, and it is also very fruitful to discuss a certain issue with colleagues who are very deeply interested in the topic, and I think all of them, I think, did their dissertation on some issue around teachers' assessment competencies. Yes, I also have to mention our experts. So the meetings we do are accompanied by experts we can choose, and these are the ones we chose so far, and had great experiences with them. So if you ever, okay, the network is funded by the German Research Foundation, and if you ever think about establishing a network, it's a great thing to do. Okay, now I'm at the end of my talk. I thank you all very, very much for coming. It was a great pleasure, and yeah, I'm looking forward to your questions and to discussing with you now or later at the conference.
We have time maybe for 3 or 4 questions before finishing the session. There were 2 first. I give the gender bonus, and then it's yours. I'll give it to you. Is it okay for you? Yeah, we do. Go ahead, you have the microphone.
Sorry. Okay.
Just a note to the differences in accuracy, judging accuracy you found for minority groups. They are quite problematic to my opinion. So it shows that teachers use different reference norms in their judgment. So that's a problem. And they were more accurate for the weak performing learners in your studies. So that could mean that for minorities, teachers tend to be more strict and more in their feedback. If it has an impulse for the feedback and the grading. So there could be a bigger problem that the results at first sight seem to show.
Yes, you were a good interpreter of the descriptive results. We just saw what we have in the teacher's judgment is a tendency towards the mean. And so if students are judged lower or are judged higher, they are also judged more accurately. And this is especially the case for the low achieving students. Point.
I can try it once more. Just don't have it to change.
She prefers without.
Okay.
If it's going to make noise.
But why don't you try? Just soft.
I can do that. We were curious what the teachers or the teacher education students who participated in these experiments were told about what they were doing. Because partly because we were curious when you had the ethnicity experiments and the gender ones, there were very few in the minority group, and they might have been aware that there would be a spread. So if you only had 3 Asian students, they might know there would be a low, a high, and somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, as I said, the simulated classroom has an introductory part where we tell the participants the class, the grade level the students are in, and but we don't say anything about this is a class including minority students of different ethnicity or something like that. We didn't say anything about that. As you could see, and maybe I can go back. As you can see in this design, this is the study 2 design, where the Asian students were in the minority, and we also had a Turkish student in the classroom to diminish the effect of the Asian students. So we wanted to look this like a natural classroom. We didn't analyze the data of the Turkish student in this scenario, but we didn't want it to look like there are Asian and German students and there's a difference or something. So.
I have one question by Tina, and you, and then we have to finish.
Thank you for the first one.
Yeah. Try it.
Hi.
Try on
I
small.
can try it.
If you press it a little bit more.
I can try it now.
Is it working?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
So thank you for the presentation. I share your happiness about the accuracy of teacher judgments. But this as well makes me very curious about the way of inaccuracy. So did you check for under or overestimation of special students? Because research has shown that a kind of overestimation can be very supportive for students' development. So do you have any information about over or underestimation of children's achievement in your studies?
As you see when we look at the descriptive results, and I just, as I said to your comment, we do have a tendency towards the mean in the teachers' judgments, and usually, especially the achievement of the low achieving students is overestimated, and the achievement of the high achieving students is judged quite well, as we can see. So there's especially an overestimation of the low achieving students, which might be good when you think pedagogically, but as we know, for example, from the PISA results, teachers weren't quite able to judge a student's reading ability there, and they weren't good at identifying low achieving readers. So this might also be a problem, but yeah.
I have a question to how you exactly calculate the accuracy. Is it subtraction of the percentages they have given and then a summing up over all students? And the second question is, do you have information of how many questions teacher pose to the different students who are more accurate in their judgment than others? So is there an influence of how many questions they addressed, and did they address more questions to, for example, minority students or not?
Mm-hmm.
And then the third question, when you presented the interaction effect, I think that the statement wasn't, I couldn't really see the interaction effect in your conclusion. So if you are going back to this.
Maybe I'll start with the second question, which I remember quite. No primacy, no recency effect. I think the second question. It was related to how often the students are asked, and we have this data that it comes with our experiment, and we also have analyzed the effect of the number of calls, right, thank you, of the number of calls on teachers' judgment, but there was no effect. So the students are called upon quite often in the course of lessons. That's why we limit a lesson to about 20 minutes, and teachers make many calls during that time. The first question concerned the accuracy of teachers' judgment and how we calculated it. You refer to the moderation analysis. Okay, this is a moderation analysis, and the dependent variable are the teacher's judgments. So this is the achievement judgment. And then as predictors, we had the student actual achievement.
I did understand that. I just didn't. Can you press click?
Again?
Forward?
Yes, here. No, stop.
Okay.
Asian students of the ethnicity minority in the class were judged more accurately.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the interaction? Isn't it that the good students in the ethnicity groups are more judged better, and the bad are just less?
That's the interpretation of the moderation analysis, I think.
But it's not written in the statement.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But I think I think the point that you can clarify that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Under time. So we have one last question.
Thank you very much for wonderful presentations. And a real, with margins, a real classroom situation, teacher use these informations. I think this style of research is a predictor each student's score in each and each. But I think the reality of teacher predict the distribution of the student. For example, in this classroom, a lot of the lower students exist in this topic. So we take care a lot for the students we're teaching. But for this topic too big in this class, so both sides really pay attention. That kind of a way is a very, for me, it's really realistic. So, but there's a new way to consider more accuracy or predicting the distributions of the student is another big direction of the research. So how you think about this is the one question. And very quick two questions is, I think this information might be very useful for teacher also. I mean that the teacher knows, oh, my prediction is not correct. And then might be considered a little bit a lot. So the way another is there, use those information to improve their educational practices. So how you think about these points, I'm very happy to listen. Thank you very much.
Yes, we've thought about using the simulated classroom as kind of a training instrument, for example. And as I said, we already have the feedback for the participants, so they get an idea how accurate they were. And as I said, especially the teachers, students like to work with this instrument and like to have the opportunity to interact with the simulated students. And to your first comment, I think it's a good idea. Maybe one could use a different teacher judgment. So we may want to ask the teachers which students do you remember that were low achieving. So we have different categories of the students and not the individual students themselves. So thank you for the good idea.
So then it's my time to say thank you to you, Anna, for this really inspiring keynote presentation. Thank you all for coming. Enjoy lunch and the break and come back to the next sessions. And the ones who couldn't post their questions, come to the